Hello, everyone. This is your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. I am your host for today's author interview. Joining me today is an author and editor of Wild Owl Literature, an online freelance independent publishing and editing brand. My guest today writes fiction and nonfiction, which can be found on wildowlliterature.com. His fields of interest include philosophy, mythology, religion, and martial arts, which heavily influence his work, whether writing a novel, editing a manuscript, or teaching a university English course. Joining us today as a new timer on the show is MarQuese Liddle. Marquez, thank you so much for joining us today. And did I say your name correctly?
It's actually pronounced Marquise. It's a bastardization from French Marquis or Marquise. But however you want to pronounce it is fine.
Okay.
Everyone says it differently. Yeah.
All right, Marquise. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, before we begin the interview, is there anything more you can tell us about your background?
Well, the one that you read off was rather thorough. I don't know if it mentioned where I was from. That might be of interest to people. So I was born and raised in this at this stage, still living, hopefully not for very much longer, in Wheeling, West Virginia, which is a relatively small town, large for West Virginia standards, up at the north. We call it the Northern Panhandle, just up between Ohio and Pennsylvania. And so I have a number of strange cultural influences uh, that make them up, and hopefully my speech does not reflect that too much. I've tried to clean up, let's say, the West Virginia accent, particularly one. It's not so thick here in Wheeling, unless you go like maybe 10 miles south, in which case all of a sudden you feel like you're in Texas or something.
All right,
Yeah, I'm not
nice.
bad.
So, growing up, when would you probably say is like you realize you want to dive into writing? Like, where did that whole writer's bug sort of just come about?
And so I didn't identify it as like a writer's, I never heard of writer's book before, but I didn't know that I wanted to write until probably high school. Before that, the idea that I could be an author was something that was apart from the possibilities to me. I grew up in mostly with my grandparents. I had a single mom, dad in prison, no books really in the house at all. And so, but I did play a lot, not too many video games as a kid. So I thought, oh, I want to make games because that was the way that I got a lot of stories. But in high school, once I started reading a little bit, not a whole lot until really university, and really after that, when I was in grad school is when I did most of my reading. It's never too late if you're starting late out there. I thought, okay, I wanted to be an author, and then it got crushed, smashed out of me by the public
Really?
education system. Yeah, yeah. So I eliminated that from my array of possibility, went into undergrad for exercise physiology, which is exercise science at most universities. I was planning on doing like physical therapy, something like that. And then one day I was jogging with an exchange student. His name was Taras, and I can never pronounce his last name. He's from Ukraine. Like I can't pronounce it. Starts with an L. Um, but we were jogging and talking about what we could do if we could really do whatever we wanted. He wanted to get into cinematography, and I thought, I really want to write. That was sophomore year. After that, I really dove in and said, I'm going to actually try to do this. And by my, I did a super senior year in undergrad, and at that point, I decided, you know what, I I'm too embittered by the world right now. I don't want to go help people with physical therapy. I want to actually do what I originally wanted to do, which is write novels. And obviously, you can help people in a different kind of way. And I'm sure we'll get into that as we talk about my motivations for writing.
Nice, very nice. So, once you decided that you really wanted to get back into writing, did you start out in like short stories, little novelettes, poetry? Like, what was sort of like your first writing project that you actually began working on when you decided that you wanted to get back into writing?
Yeah, so I did the worst thing you could do, which is I was going to write an epic fantasy novel, and it was originally planned to be one book, and then I realized partway through the plot was too big, and it had to be two. And then I thought, well, I don't want to do two books. That's kind of weird. Then I'll make it three. and I ended up finishing the first one. It took me 6 years to write it. Yeah, right. And it was a total flop too, and I've since abandoned it, which was a rather painful experience. But um, that's my first entryway, and part of that had to do with what I was reading at the time. So um, that was when um, Song of Ice and Fire started to get really popular. HBO just started doing the
Mm-hmm.
TV show. I watched the first two seasons, like literally, I watched the first season, went to bed, got up, watched the second season, and then that was it at the time. So then I went and read all the books that were out. I think I have, yeah, I have them behind me there.
Wow.
And that, yeah, that influenced my writing. So then I was like, I'm going to write a book like George R. R. Martin, like a little idiot that I was, and spent 6 years doing it. So if you're listening to this, write short stories first because you don't want to have your first book be 6 years in the making, so that that's 6 years of learning experience because that's what it amounts to.
That is honestly true, and I completely know the feeling. My first book, it took me like five. It took me 5 years to get done. That was in between schooling and everything. And I have to agree as well that it's a learning experience, trying to find your author's voice, trying to figure out what kind of genres you like, what kind of interests you really want to write about. Which kind of leads into my next question. So, your field of interests are in the beginning philosophy, mythology, religion, and martial arts. So, how did you sort of incorporate those four into your stories, and sort of where did those interests come about? Were those natural things you were always interested in, or did they sort of come later in life?
Always been interested in all of them actually. So during my teenage years, I spent 10 years training in a traditional Chinese martial art and not wushu. This was I don't. It's a funny story. It's worth telling. It's very short. So my sifu, his sifu is my kung fu teacher, came to of all places Wheeling, West Virginia, because we have a university nearby, West Liberty, where I went to did my undergrad. They used to have a really competitive swimming team, like almost like Olympic level swimming team, and so he got a
Mm.
scholarship back when they did that. And he swam for them and decided, well, some people saw him training at West Liberty, just asked them to teach him, and then that's how we had an actual very hard traditional kung fu school here in Wheeling for the time that it was able to exist. Um, Struggled by during the 2008 financial crisis, and then culturally after that, it was impossible to maintain students. They didn't want to do the torturous training. I don't know if you've ever seen some of the really, really old Jackie Chan films where he's being like tortured by the kung fu teacher.
Yes.
Yeah, it was kind of like that, and actually getting people to do that is very difficult. So they didn't. But that affected me quite a lot, and I've always had an interest in philosophy, though I didn't know to call it that at the time. And I also had this weird interest in religion, despite being kind of the edgy anti-theist atheist of the new atheist movement when I was younger, probably around about the early 20s. Um, Grew up out of that to a large degree, but I it's still there a little bit. You can tell by my favorite philosophers. Like if you look, I don't know, they readers can say they probably can't see. I've got like all of Nietzsche's books over there, which I've read through.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so Friedrich Nietzsche comes in. You asked me though, how does it comes into my writing, right? I
Hmm.
kind of went on a tangent there. So what you're doing in martial arts and what you're doing with philosophy and what you're doing with religion are all the same thing. Most fundamentally, you're trying to figure out um, how to confront the challenges that life is putting in front of you in an affirmative manner, meaning that you're trying to understand it so that you can move in the world, very Nietzschean, right? The will to power. If anyone doesn't understand what that means, it means, and I won't go on, but power just means you're able to fulfill your desires. You're able to affect the world. If your car has power, it moves. If you have power,
Right.
electricity, you can turn the lights on. If you have the power to drink a coffee, you pick it up and bring it to you. So the martial arts is the same way. You have adversity confronting you, and you need to exercise your will, which is to survive and not be injured or to win in a contest. And philosophy to discover the truth so that you can do something with the truth. It's not good enough just to discover it. And in terms of my writing, I would say I do that not just thematic, which we can get into in a little bit, but also in the process of writing itself. I approach my writing with a genuine question that I don't have an answer to. The characters in the plot are symbols around which that question is answered as best as I can manage to do it from the
Mm.
point of view of those characters. Um, and we can dig into the details as we go, but I've been jabbering on for far too
Hey, that actually makes complete sense. And it is kind of very, very true. There is sort of like this similarity with like religion, mythology, philosophy, and Ryan. They're all trying to answer a question. It may not always get to the exact right answer, but will get us close to the answer. And that's really, really cool. And it's also pretty cool. I'm going to nerd out here for a little bit. It's also nice to meet a fellow martial artist talking about writing and discussing. And for those who may not know this about me, I also studied in martial arts for a few years, and it definitely does change you. Definitely helps you see things in a different light. And I also have to agree that it does kind of like help really shape your understanding of like certain characters, like things, situations, which I would never have known that had I not joined martial arts. And so, with that kind of in mind, with this understanding that you've gotten from all these different fields, what is sort of the need or desire you want to satisfy for your readers?
So, a couple things. I want, I want my. We'll start with the desire, the need. You know that feeling you get when you overcome something incredibly difficult, where it's this kind of fist punching, like yes, like right.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'll probably mention this again, but there is a kind of tragedy that I present in my novels, and I present it there because I think that a lot of life is tragic, but that the tragedy opens this opportunity for you to have that feeling of a, you've trained in martial arts, when you've been pushing, and trying to achieve
Mm-hmm.
maybe or achieve some rank if it's that type of martial art, or just to complete a particular form or to learn a particular technique or finally overcome these people in a sparring match or if you're rolling in jiu-jitsu, whatever you're doing. And you find that you're able to do it, you're able to, I don't know, like catch someone in an arm bar, get them to tap out.
Yes.
A lot harder to do than it sounds because I've tried. And you have that feeling of I have overcome. And in terms of the desire for the reader, that's really what I hope they get by the end of the story. I hope to challenge them, and then when they finish, they felt like they got through something hard, right? Like you got to read a classic novel, it's the same way. When you start reading, I don't know, I've got Paradise Lost somewhere back there. I've got a couple of them actually. One of them's that orange kind of
All right.
thing. And when you read Paradise Lost, at least for me, when you start reading, you're like, I can't understand John Milton at all, like at all. But then if you slam your face against the book enough times and read it, you start to pick apart. Okay, these are all allusions to like the Bible or biblical stories or other mythologies. Here's where the actual narrative is. Okay, I can understand the Latinic rearrangement of the syntax. That's okay now. And then boom, all of a sudden you discover, oh, I can just read this now, and you get this feeling of not only accomplishment but level of sophistication of understanding and thinking. And if you're a writer, I'm probably going another tangent, but if you're a writer, you realize I can now use this in a way that I could not before. That's a tangent, so I'll stop there.
But I have to agree. I definitely have to agree with you on that. There is sort of like a satisfying thing when, as readers, when we actually read a story that at first we do not understand. And it's maybe because, like, either the author's style of writing or the words they use, it is kind of frustrating. But as you said, if you pound your face into the book so many times, eventually you will get it. And it is kind of like a satisfying realization. It's like, oh, this is what the author is trying to get you. And then you actually see the true story. It's like you have the story that's written down on the page, and then there's the subtle story, the story that's the true narrative. And that is kind of, I definitely feel as authors, that's kind of like the most difficult thing to actually to write out is the subtle story. And kind of leading onto that, that would just say it's like a promise that you're making to your readers that I know there's going to be maybe a little bit difficult. This may be something completely new, but I promise you it is going to be worth it, and you're going to take something incredible from this story.
I wish I could make a promise, but I've discovered that different people have different tastes. And those tastes are not really as not as subjective as that sounds. Right? So what I find is different people are at different stages of their life, and they have different capacities and abilities that allow them to appreciate something or not. I compare it to for some people, the ultimate food is going to be the most decadent food. They might have their cheesecake or their ice cream or whatever it is, the sweet
Right.
indulgence. But if you spent a lot of time eating very nutritious food and you stayed away from decadent food, actually what you find is your tastes change, right? And you actually start to appreciate things that otherwise might be even repugnant. Like I drink a lot of coffee. There's some decadence in that, but I drink, black coffee, particularly usually an espresso lungo or a double espresso, something like that. And I really appreciate the flavor of that. And you give that to someone who's used to dumping cream and sugar in their coffee, and they're going to spit it in your face.
Yes.
And so because of that, I can't make the promise that they're going to find something, because if my work, it's like picking up. I won't use John Milton again. I'll use H.P. Lovecraft, right? Because I had the same experience with him. You give him to someone who's an amateur reader, and they're not going to be able to read him very well, because his prose is essentially too complex in the technical sense, like the arrangement of the sentence clauses and the connections between sentences. Like sometimes they run on for way too long, and there's a certain cadence, or it's not a meter because it's not regular, but something like a meter in his writing that you have to be able to sense and pick up to be able to read the sentences so that you're reading them. And you pause in this eerie way, and the tone and the prose come into confluence with one another. Like until you pick that up, you're not going to appreciate H.P. Lovecraft for what he is, or if you don't have the tolerance for the boredom. Like you read Shadows over Innsmouth. Shadows over Innsmouth is really slow
Mm-hmm.
right up until he's in a hotel room, and then there's someone at the door, and then all of a sudden things get really tense, really fast, and that was perhaps the most horrified I've ever felt reading a story, like reading fiction. But it required the tolerance for that boredom, and if you just don't have it, you're just not going to get there. You're not going to get there, or your eyes are going to be glazed over, and you're not going to enjoy the story. What I can promise readers, though, is that the theme or thesis, because those two words are interrelated etymologically, right? Those things are genuine. I will not write. I won't have in my story a symbolized answer to a question or a conundrum that I knew ahead of time. Won't do it because I feel like that's propagandistic. It's like me trying to trick you into agreeing with me. Rather than do that, I can promise the reader that whatever they're reading my story is a genuine exploration of something that I myself struggled with, and this is the best answer I can in the moment, right? So that's my promise to my reader.
Awesome. That's actually really, really true. And I'm actually glad you brought that up because it is true. Like authors will always try to write and try to make a promise to a reader that, oh, you're going to like this, you're going to like this. But 9 times out of 10, as you said, the reader is not going to automatically latch onto the story. Like it takes a certain type of reader to really enjoy the story. Like the average reader, as you said, they're not going to enjoy like Lovecraft or any of like the stories of like very high in depth prose, or kind of like maybe convoluted prose. Unless you have a tolerance for that, you're easily going to be bored or be like, I'm not going to read this again, so I'm putting this away. But if you tolerate it and you can see the theme that's coming about, as you said, you are going to get that connection. And in a way, that is a promise that you're going to figure out. And I think that's really beautifully said. So, would you say, kind of like on the same thing, is that something that you want your readers to feel and experience, that the theme that you're going through, or whatever you're going through when you're writing that story, is the same thing that you hope they're going to feel, or at least maybe come to that feeling when reading a story of yours?
That's really kind of what I want. If I use an example to there we go, over here. To my left, I don't know what's you guys, and you can see the recordings. It flips on the camera, but from Wand Smoke Broken, so the first book in that Wand Smoke series. The character with the elk skull on his face. I'm going to use him as an example. There's a point where he's trapped and isolated, and he has to come to a kind of moment of self-reflection and also self-forgiveness. And we say that all the time. If you've ever read any literature from, let's say, recovering drug addicts, so I have a friend who's in NA, is still in NA, recovering addict. I've done podcasts with him and talked to him a number of times. And he gave me, it's funny, he told me, like, dude, you're like a drug addict who never figured out how to use drugs to solve your existential angst, which is kind of true. But I went through like the NA handbook, and they talk about a lot about self-forgiveness, but that's like a lot harder. You could say that like it's a phrase. What does it actually mean to forgive yourself? Say that's one of those genuine questions. I do want, in the moment where I force Conti into that situation, and I have to say, what is this? What is this self-forgiveness and self-acceptance? Like, how do you imagine it? How do you experience it? And then how do you feel it? It's like, maybe I need to forgive myself. And I am hoping that the reader, in seeing, if I managed, you don't know, right? But if I did manage to represent that symbolically well enough that they can relate to, in this case, the character Conti well enough while he's going through this experience, that they too can say, maybe I need to do some of this myself. Maybe I'm caught in a cave with the air running out, right? Because time goes on, you have so much time, and you have to make a decision, or maybe someone might suffer if you're not able to do this, which is the situation that he's in, right? He's got to rescue, or at least he believes he has to rescue someone to get out, and he doesn't know. And the only way to do so is to clear his soul so that he can perform the magic necessary. And maybe that's true for you, reader. That is what I'm hoping.
Nice. That honestly, that is beautifully said. And for everything you've told me, I mean, you clearly have like almost like a very philosophical approach, like you're writing. Like you always want to have like this message in your stories, which is from what I'm getting. And I think it's really, really powerful. And then I think readers definitely like to have stories where there is almost like either a philosophical message or like a theme that they can relate to. So with that in mind, what has sort of like been the feedback from like people that have like read your work when you started writing, and at the point now in your life, has the feedback been the same?
So the feedback. So I could talk about my first novel, Salt, Sand, and Blood. Had very little feedback because very, 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 very little reach, and essentially from that, I had certainly failed. Right, the characters did not feel relatable. The plot did not feel to the reader coherent. It wasn't aimed at a theme, though. If I had maybe had one developing. So in that sense, no, but I developed quite a lot when I did Wand Smoke. So this novel behind me, Broken, and all the writing that came thereafter, I decided to write something that was going to, let's say, unabashedly appeal to my own taste without any care about what trends would be or if anyone would accept it. And the result from that has been, from the readers that have read my works, that they generally speaking, people do, receive the theme, right? It's not meant to be hidden or anything, so it's no great feat of mine that they've managed to read it. Though I will say, I can't really answer this question with confidence because I'm relatively unknown. I've got a few reviews, but until I really get my career off the ground as an author, which is my intention, uh, who knows? It could be that if I end up selling down 10,000 novels at some point, that 1,000 of those people come back and say, like, I don't understand this. It could be. It's hard to tell when you're small because the people around you have the best in mind. They're interpreting you the most generous. So there's one. And they're giving you the benefit of the doubt they want to. So until I get really harsh critiques, I won't know. And if you are seeing me on here and you'd like to look at the work and give me harsh critiques, I'd be very happy to have them.
And honestly, I that is completely true. And I definitely like what you said about starting out as like a new author, because I completely know the feeling starting off and like really trying to like, get your project down, like your first pretty much step into like the world of publishing, and it is kind of an intimidating feeling. And I've met like a lot of authors on this journey of mine interviewing people where there have been moments that have been very bleak. It's like it is a lonely feeling to write a novel, to put your hard work and soul into a piece takes years and a lot of loneliness and a lot of commitment. And 9 times out of 10, it's a hit or miss. And I've learned that myself. I've had to change my writing style. I've had to change how I approach writing. I'm sure you've probably also had to reevaluate what kind of stories you want to write and how you want to approach writing. So, kind of like in that together, kind of combine two questions. What sort of motivates you to write, and what would you say is your why? Why do you write?
So it's a somewhat of an easy answer for me. I write because it seems to be the thing that people they call it a calling. It's what my where my talents orient myself, and I feel like I could do well. And that's I think okay, well that's a really thin, shallow reason, Marquise, but I don't think so. I really don't. So a lot of people will not identify that thing that could be what you might call their dream, right? And if you get
Right.
it's a sort of gets the reference this guy over there, Griffith, right?
Mhm.
The idea of having a dream and that being the thing that gives your entire existence meaning. And I do think your existence needs meaning, or else you suffer meaninglessly.
Right.
And for me, that was a huge issue where I realized where am I going with my life? What's going to make me feel as though life is worthwhile? Because I had and suffered from depression for many, many, many years, all through the writing Saul's Hand in Blood. I was deeply depressed. Um, and that's my why. Because if I can inspire people in the same way that other works inspired me, that got me off my butt and doing something, making
Mhm.
something, trying to make something of myself, then I can fulfill, it's like the Aristotelian idea of telos, right? Which often is translated as something of a purpose, but I don't like purpose because it's not objective enough for me. I prefer the word function. Like, what is it that I do that I can do and contribute? And if that happens to be my writing for whatever reason, and it seems to be for me, then that's you know, what gets me up in the morning is this idea that I'm going to achieve my dreams. I'm going to be an author of, it's not exactly the renown that I really want. Obviously, every author wants to be successful because if you're successful, then well, you're making money. If you're making money, then you can keep writing and don't have to worry about money.
Right. Yeah.
Famous, you'll sell, and you're famous, you'll sell, right? And it feels good to have status. Like it's absurd to say that these aren't motivations. However, I don't think they're sufficient because you find when people have those things without a deeper, let's say, satisfaction, or if they don't satisfy their the meaning in their lives, then fame and wealth are you know they're unsatisfying. They're not sufficient to
Right.
keep you going. I really want to feel that I'm inspiring other people and getting them to pursue their own dreams like I want to pursue mine, like other works of fiction did for me.
Nice. And that's actually kind of the same answer I got from another one of my guests who said, for writers, for authors, of course we want to make this a career, and we also like, have the status that comes with it, and of course generate capital and everything. But I think being an author is much more than that. It's inspiring new people. It's making them feel safe. It's taking them to a different world and escape from reality, even if it's just for a little bit. And I definitely think that is really, really true for like any author, for like any story. It's an escapism. And I think it is very, very true. Like at the end of the day, we as authors will pass away. We will eventually move on. but our works will survive. They will exist beyond us. They will be immortal, and they will keep our world's life. And I definitely think that is a very, very powerful message. And kind of along that same line, what author would you say have been like a huge role model in your approach to writing and how you view yourself as an author?
This is a tricky one. I have a couple authors who've influenced me. Um, so we've got the pulp guys. We've got like H.P. Lovecraft or Robert E. Howard. Both of these work I have behind me. Uh, I am hugely influenced also by Nietzsche. Now he wrote philosophy and mostly nonfiction, unless you want to count Thus Spake Zarathustra, which did have a major impact on me in terms of its use of deep psychological symbolism, which I didn't understand until after I started reading Jung, like Carl Gustav Jung, the psychoanalyst. But there are other influences as well. Cormac McCarthy, I've read a few of his novels, but most notably, the two that affected me the most were Blood Meridian foremost, and also The Road to a
Right.
smaller extent. But those authors really influenced me quite a lot. Stylistically, I would say Cormac McCarthy and Nietzsche affected me quite a lot. But in terms of narrative structure, the pulps, that's really where
Mhm.
I draw quite a lot. Probably more, even though I didn't read as much Howard when I was first writing, Robert E. Howard's work, particularly the Conan, has been a bigger influence more recently. But before then, I'd read a decent amount of H.P. Lovecraft, and more recently, like Clark Ashton Smith. And I'm still digging through some of the more obscure authors, but their works they've been quite the influence.
Nice, very nice. And kind of almost leading into the next question, as I'm sure when you started writing, you may have had in the beginning like a particular reader in mind or an audience in mind. And do you still have that reader in mind when you write your stories? And kind of a part to that, do you write your stories with the sole idea for this imaginary reader or readers in mind, or do you write for yourself in the sense that these are the books that you wished you had growing up?
So I usually don't have a particular reader in mind, and that example you gave right at the very end, where writing for essentially like almost a younger version of myself, I would say that I do something more in that vein. I've tried my hand at writing children's books, which I actually intend to do more of. I wrote one for my stepdaughter. It was a little choose your own adventure story, and I want to do a bunch of those actually. It's a lot of fun to write those. But if I'm not aiming at a particular age group, because that matters because of reading level, like you can just write to where if you're writing for you know kids that are supposed to be 8 years old or something or 10, then like you could just blast them away with too
Right.
high diction, too intensive figures of speech and such. But other than that, no, it's always you know the the people who like me were looking for something that would um, you mentioned escapism earlier. Um,
Hmm.
might be a slight deviation from the question, so cut me off if you feel like you need to. But about a year ago, maybe, or perhaps a little longer ago, I was having a conversation with a friend, and we were discussing escapism, and we actually discovered escapism is on this spectrum with propaganda. Those two things being an extreme of each other. So propaganda is like the answer given to you prepackaged with the work, and then escapism is like titillation with no deeper utility. It's just excitement for the sake of excitement, and then somewhere between those things is an Aristotelian mean, right? Why Aristotelian? Why don't we just say like a mean? Well, if you read Aristotle, he points out the mean doesn't fall in the middle. The mean, it sometimes it falls closer to one extreme or the other. The idea is that it's that point where you have the ideal amount of lack of deficit and lack of excess. Um, and when I'm thinking of my own reader, I'm thinking of someone who desires a work that isn't a prepackaged idea, like as much as I love Anne Rand, her novels are like, it's already been decided. Before she started writing, she had an articulated philosophy, and the novels were the propaganda for those. Um, but it's also not just, raw and rampant escapism like I've read in some books. What is it? I think the guy's name is Terry Mancourt. I tried to get through his first book, Spellmonger, um, but it was essentially just power fantasy wish fulfillment the whole time, and I couldn't get through. Maybe if you guys like it, check it out, but I couldn't do it. Or even I would say to some degree, books like I tried to read through like the first couple. I did read through the first couple novels of the Dresden Files and same thing. I felt like this was formulaic escapism. It was made for pleasure, like an opiate to,
Right.
anesthetize one from life. I'm definitely not writing for that person. They won't get that. If you try to read my book to anesthetize yourself from the tragedy and pains of reality, you will find them enhanced in your face in symbolic and fantastical form. Instead,
All right.
someone who has that kind of taste, like the kind of person who drinks black coffee and eats 100% cocoa on camera. So if you're that kind of person, you don't have to do it on camera. But if you're that kind of person, then that's the audience that I'm.
Nice. Very nice. Now, I figure it would be wrong for me not to include probably the most interesting thing I read about you, which is World Isle literature. Now, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that and sort of how you got connected with that writing brand and what really is World Isle literature.
So, Wild Isle literature isn't a whole lot, right? And actually, you'll find this out pretty quickly. When you start out as an author, you could just go with your name, or you could try to have a kind of publishing brand for yourself. Wild Isle literature is essentially a marketing logo. It's me. I am Wild Isle literature for now. I do have a goal of expanding and eventually making a small press. That would be like the dream. Like, if I'm successful enough that I, am making more than ends meet on my work, and I can afford to. That would be ideal. Buy some property, buy a commercial press, and start publishing not just my own
Mhm.
works, which would give me my own methodology of distribution, which would be nice. But also, I hope one day to be able to help other authors who I know are struggling to get their works out there. It's it's dog eat dog. It's extremely difficult. The
Yes.
market is flooded. So Wild Owl literature for now is the the marketing for myself and my services. It could be MarQuese Liddle. If you're interested in the name, I grew up on Wheeling Island, which is a little island in the middle of the Ohio River, and so Wild Isle, Wheeling Island. That's
Ah,
more
okay.
interesting. That's more interesting than what Wild Isle literature is as a brand. Yeah, unless you want to ask what the specific things they do under that brand, in which case that might be more interesting. But it itself is, and by the way, if you're listening to this, that's true for a lot of these publishing brands. Even in traditional publishing, a lot of the times you'll just have a bajillion different names and logos that are really just
Mhm.
faces for the publishing houses. Like you open a book that says an imprint of Penguin Random House, right?
Yes.
So in this case, an imprint of me.
Oh, okay, all right. So is Wild Isle almost like an is it like an online platform for like independent authors can like submit their work and it's there on the site for free, or what specifically are like the mechanics? It's like marketing indie authors. Is it like trying to get them connections? Like, what can you tell us about it and like your experiences with it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wish it was all those things, and if anyone has any interest in having the work hosted, I would love to filter through work and host things. Right now, it's a personal platform for me, right? So I can work with my books there. I have a blog. I host my podcast through Wild Owl Literature. I also host my host is the wrong word, market, probably better, my editing and ghostwriting services through there. And it gives me a place to publish essays as well. So I've got
Oh,
everything that is
okay.
centered in one place. Now, again, I mentioned the small press in the future. That's the ultimate dream. More proximal to now, I want to do a literary magazine. I'm writing like a year's work because I want to publish my own work in a literary magazine ahead of time. But once I have enough work that I can really finances to finance like cover art and other things like that. I'll probably start looking for artists who are interested. So if
Mm.
you're interested in the next year or two of contributing something like 6 to 12 small stories for a magazine, then Wild Eye Literature will be the I don't want to say host, but the platform for those. And if people are interested in posting their fiction, I'm perfectly willing to have a little guest spot or guest blog post. So, yeah, if you're interested in that, you can check out my website, see if you like it, and if you'd like your work to be there, just contact me.
Oh, okay. And it almost kind of seems or reminds me of another one of my friends, Charlotte Courtney Adkins, fellow author and historian. He almost has something very similar, his own press as well, which I definitely feel that there is kind of like a satisfying thing of having your own publishing house or press house because you do have authority over it. And I'm sure you can definitely agree. In the world of like publishing for indie authors, you do want to retain some authority of your work. And also for traditionally published, which I've learned, it's not as easy as it was before. Actually, it was never easy, honestly, to begin with, where you had to find an agent, you really had to sell your book. And if your book didn't make any sales, you were done. You were instantly done. But with indie publishing, which I've seen, it's like the new craze. Like a lot of successful authors are going the independent route because they're able to not only maintain their authorial voice and rights over their content, but they're also pretty much establishing their own brand. So, would you say, with everything that you've said, MarQuese, that would kind of be like your end goal in the future?
Yeah, that's absolutely 100%. Because I went to with Salt Sand and Blood, I tried to go the traditional publishing route before I ended up independently publishing it. And it was, you go through the ringer. You could do that for decades and decades and just never get an agent. And it could be just bad luck, right? Because they get such
Mhm.
piles up to here, and like sometimes time to go to lunch, push the pile into the trash because I'm going to have another one tomorrow, right? And so traditional publishing is incredibly difficult. It needs to get an agent. That doesn't even mean you publish for that. Your agent then has to pitch your book in the same way that you pitch to the agent then has to pitch to the publishing
Right.
houses. And once you don't do well, they'll pitch you in the trash bin. But they're also kind of evil and fickle in a way. It's not evil, but if you succeed in indie publishing, then the agents will come falling up to you. Like a lot of indie published people who have succeeded will have reported this. And the thing is, like, once you're already successful as an indie publisher, the traditional publishing has nothing to offer you anymore because the whole point of being traditionally published is that your stuff is like finding finding an audience like in the bookstores. But if you already have one, what are they doing? They're not marketing for you. They're sure selling one.
Right.
And that is what I hope to do with Wild Owl Literature is to have really control. Because right now I'm publishing through Amazon because I hate to say it, Amazon has the best quality of books published for print on
Mhm.
demand services. And you get a better royalty than you get elsewhere, and you can charge less. So your books are cheaper to produce, you make more per book, and the quality is better. And the distribution is also faster. So unless you're doing, there are perhaps other good digital distribution centers. Smashwords, I think, is still out there. I've seen like Drafted Digital and like other distributions. I think they're like aggregate the digital, but I don't want to be beholden to Amazon the whole of my career. That feels uncomfortable. I'd like to have my own press where I am in control. So that is the goal, particularly for any indie publisher now, because you know if you're able to get that far along, then you don't have to worry so much about the constant flood and the algorithm and playing that game
Right.
as much.
I completely agree. My books of course are on Barnes and Noble, and I liked so far e-publishing is probably like the best thing, but there is kind of the sense of like you are kind of like beholden to whoever's like printing up your books, and it would be really nice to actually find like a publishing house, like a indie one that really helps expand your voice and who you are. Because I've always keep saying indie publishing, you do have control of your own content, but the other downside is you have to do everything. You have to find the cover artist, you have to find an editor, you have to find a marketing agent, you have to do all of that, and it takes a lot of money and a lot of time. But if you're able to successfully do it, then it's worth it in the end. And we're almost nearing the end of the interview. So, MarQuese, I'm going to ask you probably the last two important questions. The first one is, have you ever gotten a sense of validation from other authors that you've met online who've had a chance to see your work? And probably the most important question, what is your word of wisdom to future authors?
So I'll shout out a few authors that I know who have helped me and continue to help me to this day. Um, in no particular order, it's whoever comes to top of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So Justin Herzog is an independently published author. He's also done at least one traditionally published book, but he went to grad school with him at the University of Tampa, and he gave me a ton of advice and continues to do so if I ever need to ask him anything, and really helped me get my start. I'm to this day trying to reach a level of success, coming up to like a quarter of what he's already achieved. And so I can, let him know, hey, I finally made it. So it's Justin Herzog, a bunch of others, right? So I've helped and been helped by authors, Amaya Tenchi, that's the Dracula's Guest series. You can check out her work. Matt Dawson, who is an upcoming author. He publishes some things for free. I know he has the Outer Rim Braves. He's doing like a serial, but he's got another full novel that we actually worked together on. Myself as an editor, he's the actual author. The Spirit Warrior, which should hopefully be out soon. Other authors, Michael Hine. He's a big guy in a particular writing community that I'm part of, and he hosts critique sessions and everything. But he's got a collection of short stories out, right? Science fiction. The Spacer's Companion. Those who might want to check that out. Let's see, a guy who is also an author. He writes, of all things, very different than me. He writes like fantasy and science fiction, erotica. Anthony O'Bara, but I have to mention him because he's been very, very helpful to me. Um,
Nice.
Erwin Blackthorne, Molly B. Who else? I'm thinking of that stuff out there. My cover artist is also an author, Torrin Fletcher. I can't forget Torrin. He is hard to get a hold of. If you know you get a hold of him, if you like the cover art that I just redone for Once Spoke Broken, and then the books that are going to be coming out, get a hold of me. I will convince Torrin to take the commissions because he's very talented, and he, I want to get him out of his day job and doing his art full time. It's amazing. So, in terms of words of wisdom, I would say I'll leave the audience with these two ideas I get from Shangzi and Confucius. So when you're writing or when you're living your life, if you are genuine, meaning you're not putting on a front, if you're sincere in your approach, then you can know for certain that no matter what happens, whether you succeed or fail or what tragedy reaches you, you will move forward along your path, your life path, without regret. And you can't really ask for something more than that because there's nothing worse than looking back and saying, I regret my life and I regret my choices and I don't feel like I was really being who I should have been and I never became who I really should be. So um, no matter what happens, how bad things will look, be genuine, be sincere, and have faith that what fate has in store for you is good. I guess that's my words of wisdom for them.
Beautifully said, MarQuese. Beautifully said. And with that, listeners, this concludes this wonderful author interview. Before I officially end it today, I want to turn over to our guest, MarQuese, for joining us today and providing everything about him, his writing process, his insight, what motivates him. So, MarQuese, thank you so much for joining us today. And where can we find your stories? You mentioned that they're on Amazon, and do you have any other projects that we should be looking out for in the future?
Yeah, so you can find my work on Amazon. You can search up MarQuese D. Liddle or MarQuese Liddle. Across different social media too. I'm on like Facebook, Instagram, Minds, uh, formerly Twitter. I refuse to call it X, and probably other places as well, SoundCloud. YouTube, you can find me looking up Wild Isle Literature, or you can just go straight to my website. I have all this wildislet.com. I'm releasing actually a bunch of stories coming up there. They're between like a long short story and novella in length. There'll be 8 of them in total. They're the Wanspoke Tales from the Labyrinth. This is like a spin-off series, sort of sequel to the novel you see behind me. So you can check out that as it comes out. I've got a bunch of free stuff on my website as well. I won't talk your ear off, but again, it's wildislet.com. That's the best place to go to start out trying to find what all my work is at.
And I'll provide that link below so you can check out MarQuese's content. And again, listeners, I hope you've enjoyed this wonderful author interview. Again, I want to thank our guest, MarQuese Liddle, for joining us today. MarQuese, thank you so much for being an amazing guest.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. And listeners, I hope you enjoyed the content so far that I'm producing on my channel. Make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, this has been The Wandering Scribe and The Wandering Quill, signing out.